This story is titled, At My Dad's Burial Service, I accidentally overheard his brother discussing how they had secretly removed me from the inheritance documents last month, mocking and laughing at me next to the coffin while thinking I couldn't hear them. During their ridicule, I silently contacted my lawyer and secured the entire inheritance for myself, leaving them completely faceless the next day when the truth was revealed. Hey everyone, I never thought I'd be sharing something like this, but after what happened yesterday, I desperately need to get this off my chest. I apologize in advance for any formatting issues as I'm typing this on my phone while hiding in my father's bathroom. Yes, it's that kind of morning. My father passed away last week after fighting pancreatic cancer for 10 months. He was only 59 years old, too young to go, but cancer doesn't give a damn about anyone's retirement plans. Dad and I had a complicated relationship throughout my life. He wasn't the hugging type. He was more the get up, stop crying, figure it out kind of father. But beneath all that tough love, there was solid respect between us. He pushed me because he believed I could handle it. At least, that's what I choose to believe now that he's gone. The funeral was held yesterday at Pinecrest Memorial. It was a standard service with a closed casket because, as my father put it, he looked terrible at the end. He made me promise not to let people gawk at his corpse. His words, not mine. There were maybe 50 people in attendance. Dad wasn't exactly Mr. Popular, but he had a circle of friends and colleagues who came to pay their respects. After the service, I needed a minute alone. I was overwhelmed and not even sure what I was feeling. Mostly numb. 10 months of watching someone slowly fade away is like emotional sandpaper. It wears you down until there's nothing left. I wandered into a little side room off the main hall where the funeral home had these alcoves with comfortable chairs where people could sit and collect themselves. I sank into one of those overstuffed armchairs in the corner, closed my eyes, and just focused on breathing. That's when I heard them. The connecting door to the viewing room was cracked open, and my uncles Victor and Marcus came in. Their voices floated through before I could process who was talking. Uncle Victor was mid-sentence. And the way he looked at me during the service like I'm supposed to feel sorry for him or something. He's always been soft. Uncle Marcus replied, Gregory takes after his mother, not our side. I froze in place. They were talking about me. I should have made my presence known, but something in their tone made me stay perfectly still. The fool has no idea we changed Dad's will last month, Victor said, and I could practically hear the smile in his voice. Everything goes to us instead of that disappointment. They were literally standing next to my father's casket, laughing. They were fucking laughing. He thinks he's getting the house, the business, everything, Marcus added. Wait till Tuesday, when Richard reads the will. The look on his face will be priceless. Best decision we ever made, Victor said. Catching Dad when he was all doped up on those pain meds. He'd sign anything by that point. My blood went cold and the room started spinning a little. They had manipulated my dying father when he was heavily medicated. I gripped the armrest so hard my knuckles went white. Gregory couldn't even run a taco stand, Marcus said. Dad's company would be bankrupt in a year with him in charge. Victor laughed again. Well, it's not his problem anymore. I already told Elena we won't be needing her services after next week. No reason to keep Dad's charity cases on the payroll. Elena, Dad's housekeeper for the last 15 years, the woman who basically moved in to help care for him during chemotherapy, they were planning to fire her. I sat there literally shaking with rage. I'm not being dramatic. I looked down and my hands were trembling. But I didn't say a word. I didn't burst in. I didn't confront them. I just listened as they went on and on about how they'd protected the family legacy from me. Eventually, someone called for them, and they left. I sat there for maybe another 20 minutes, trying to process what I'd heard. I wanted to follow them out to the parking lot and beat them both into the pavement. The image of my uncle laughing next to my father's casket while they plotted to steal my inheritance was burned into my brain. But I didn't act on that impulse because my dad always said, never start a fight until you know exactly how you're going to end it. And right then, I had no clue what to do. So I somehow made it through the rest of the funeral. I accepted condolences, nodded at all the "he was such a good man" comments, thanked everyone for coming. All while my uncles watched me with these smug little smiles, probably thinking about how they'd pulled one over on both me and my dad. After everyone left, I drove to my father's house. Our house technically. I grew up there. Every corner holds some memory, good and bad. The dining room where Dad would drill me on science problems. The backyard where he taught me to throw a football. Badly. Neither of us were athletic. The garage where we restored that old Ford when I was 16. When I walked in, I found Elena in the kitchen, her eyes red from crying. She looked startled to see me, like she hadn't expected anyone to come by. "Oh, Gregory," she said, wiping quickly at her face. "I was just cleaning up a bit." "You okay?" I asked, even though it was obvious she wasn't. She hesitated, then just shook her head. "Your uncle stopped by this morning before the funeral. They told me I should start looking for another position," she explained. "Said once the will is read on Tuesday, they'll be taking over everything and won't need me." I felt that rage building again. "They have no right—" "It's okay," she interrupted. "Your father prepared me for this possibility. He told me those vultures would try to swoop in the moment he was gone." She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I just thought we'd have more time." We talked for a while longer. It turns out Dad had been worried about his brothers for months. According to Elena, they started visiting more frequently once Dad got really sick, but only when I wasn't around. They were always bringing paperwork and always insisting on privacy. Elena also mentioned something about a safety deposit box. She didn't know details, just that Dad had been adamant about keeping some papers there, away from the house. I stayed at Dad's place last night. I couldn't bear the thought of going back to my empty apartment. I ended up falling asleep on the couch around 3 o'clock in the morning after looking through old photo albums. I woke up this morning to my phone blowing up. 31 missed calls. 31. From Uncle Victor, Uncle Marcus, their wives, even my cousins, plus about 50 text messages asking where I was and demanding I call back immediately. I haven't responded to any of them yet, but something must have happened. Something that has them panicking. And you know what? For the first time since I heard them laughing by my father's casket, I felt something other than rage. I felt hope. Whatever's got them freaking out might be exactly what I need to fight back. Because I'm not letting them steal what Dad wanted me to have, and I'm definitely not letting them fire Elena or anyone else who was loyal to my father. Dad taught me to pick my battles, to wait for the right moment, to never throw the first punch unless I'm sure I can end the fight. Well, I think that moment might be coming sooner than my uncles expected. Something tells me this is just the beginning. First, I just want to say thanks for all the support on my last post. I didn't expect so many people to care about my family drama, to be honest. Reading your comments helped me feel less crazy about this whole situation. Remember those 31 missed calls? I finally checked the voicemails around noon yesterday, after ignoring them all morning. Most were variations of Uncle Victor and Uncle Marcus demanding I call them back ASAP about an urgent family matter. The last one from Victor was just him yelling that I needed to stop being childish and answer my damn phone. Childish. That's rich coming from someone who was giggling like a 12-year-old next to my father's casket. Instead of calling them back, I texted my friend Tanner. We've known each other since middle school, and he's been my go-to person for advice since forever. Plus, he knows a ton about legal stuff, not saying why. But trust me, he's the guy you want in your corner when things get complicated. While waiting for Tanner to arrive, I started going through Dad's home office. I wasn't sure what I was looking for exactly, but I needed to do something productive. The room still smelled like him, that mix of coffee and the weird pine-scented hand sanitizer he was obsessed with. His reading glasses were still on the desk, next to a half-filled crossword puzzle. That's when I remembered our last real conversation, about 3 weeks before he died, before the pain meds turned him into basically a shell of himself. I'd been sitting with him, trying to get him to eat something, one of those hospital protein shakes that smell like wet cardboard. Out of nowhere, he grabbed my wrist. He still had a strong grip despite everything, and told me he needed to make sure I understood something. He said that Victor and Marcus had been sniffing around like vultures lately. He explained they'd always been jealous that Granddad had left Dad in charge of the family business instead of splitting it 3 ways. Dad told me he'd made arrangements to protect what was mine, but needed me to promise I'd fight if they tried anything. I thought he was just being paranoid from the medications. Now I realize he was having one of his last lucid moments, trying to warn me about what might happen. Tanner showed up around 2 p.m., and I unloaded everything. What I overheard at the funeral, Elena's situation, the 31 calls, all of it. He didn't interrupt, just took notes on his phone while I talked. When I finished, the first thing Tanner asked was whether Dad had a regular nurse toward the end. That's when I remembered Natalie. She had been Dad's home nurse for the final 2 months. A young woman, maybe mid-20s, who always wore those colorful scrubs and played lofi beats on her phone while she worked. Dad actually liked her and said she didn't treat him like he was made of glass. I still had her number in my contacts. I called her right there with Tanner listening. She seemed surprised to hear from me, but was super helpful. She confirmed that yes, my uncles had visited multiple times in Dad's final weeks, but only when I wasn't there. They always insisted on private time with Dad, even when she told them he was heavily medicated. The kicker came when Natalie revealed that during their last visit, which must have been when they got him to sign whatever they're claiming is the new will, Dad wasn't even fully conscious. She said she walked in once during their private time to check his vitals and saw Victor holding Dad's hand with a pen, guiding it across some document, while Marcus and some guy she didn't recognize watched. She thought it was weird, but figured it was just family business. When she mentioned it to Elena later, Elena tried to call me, but I was stuck in traffic and missed the call. By the time I checked my voicemail and called back, Dad had had a bad night, and the information got lost in the chaos of that difficult evening. Tanner looked like he was about to say something when my phone started blowing up again. Victor and Marcus were calling from Victor's house. I almost ignored it, but Tanner suggested I answer and record the call. He reminded me our state only requires one-party consent for recording, so it would be totally legal. I put it on speaker. Victor started immediately, insisting that I needed to come to his house right away to discuss the will reading scheduled for Tuesday. He said there were complications they needed to address as a family before meeting with the lawyer. I played dumb and asked what kind of complications. Marcus jumped in. I guess I was on speaker on their end too, saying something about paperwork irregularities and how for everyone's benefit, we should present a united front. The whole time they were talking, I could hear this edge of panic in their voices. These guys who were laughing at my dad's funeral now sounded like they were about to have heart attacks. I told them I'd meet them at Dad's house in an hour. Their reaction? Complete silence for like 5 seconds, then Victor stammering that his place would be more appropriate. I insisted on Dad's house and they reluctantly agreed. After hanging up, Tanner and I did a quick sweep of Dad's office, looking for anything that might explain what had my uncle so freaked out. That's when I found it, tucked inside Dad's copy of The Old Man and the Sea, his favorite book. He'd made me read it like 3 times growing up. Inside was a small black moleskin notebook, Dad's journal from the past year. I only had time to skim it before Victor and Marcus were due to arrive, but holy shit, the entries from the last 6 months were basically a documentary of my uncle's gradual attempts to manipulate him. Dad had documented everything. Their visits, their suggestions about changing his will, their comments about me being unready to take over the business. The last coherent entry, dated just before he went on the heavy pain meds, mentioned a safety deposit box at First National Bank downtown, and instructions to make sure Gregory gets the key from Elena. Before I could process this revelation, the doorbell rang. Victor and Marcus stood there looking like they'd aged 10 years overnight. Victor had this fake smile plastered on his face, while Marcus couldn't even look me in the eye. Tanner stayed in the kitchen while I led my uncles to the living room. They did not look happy to see Elena still there cleaning up some dishes. Victor made some comment about unnecessary staff expenses during this transition period, which I deliberately ignored. Once we sat down, Victor started this whole speech about how they had concerns about the will reading on Tuesday. He said there might be some surprising developments that could upset the family dynamic and mentioned how Dad had made some last-minute changes that might seem out of character. I just sat there, letting them dig themselves deeper. Finally, Marcus blurted out that they were worried I might overreact when I learned Dad had changed his will to leave controlling interest in the company to them, with me getting only a generous stipend. That's when I asked, as innocently as possible, when exactly Dad had made these changes. Victor said it was about 3 weeks ago, when Dad was supposedly perfectly lucid and aware of what he was doing. I nodded, then asked why they were so concerned about my reaction if everything was legal and above board. The look they exchanged, if I hadn't already known they were lying, that look would have confirmed it. They started backpedaling, saying they just wanted to prepare me and make sure I understood Dad's reasoning. Victor even had the nerve to say Dad had told them he was disappointed in my life choices and didn't trust me with his legacy. I almost lost it right there. I almost showed them the journal. I almost told them about Natalie. But Tanner's earlier advice echoed in my head. Don't show your cards until you've seen theirs. So I just nodded again and told them I appreciated their concern but would wait to hear the will directly from the lawyer on Tuesday. Then I basically showed them out, ignoring their attempts to keep the conversation going. After they left, Tanner came out of the kitchen with the biggest grin on his face. He told me he'd recorded the whole conversation on his phone. We now had them on record, basically admitting they were worried about something. I called Elena in and asked about the safety deposit box key. Her eyes got wide, and she disappeared upstairs, returning 5 minutes later with a small envelope. Inside was a key and a note in Dad's handwriting. Gregory, in case of emergency, trust only yourself. Tanner and I went straight to the bank, but it was already closed for the weekend. I'll have to wait until Tuesday morning to see what's in that box. Later that night, I got a text from Tanner saying he'd reached out to one of Dad's old business partners, a guy named Howard who'd retired last year. Howard agreed to meet us for breakfast tomorrow. Apparently, he has some interesting stories about my uncle's business practices that might be relevant to our situation. I'm writing this from Dad's kitchen at 2 a.m. because I can't sleep. The house feels different now, not just empty because Dad's gone, but like it's waiting for something. For Tuesday, maybe. I don't know exactly what's in that safety deposit box. I don't know what Howard is going to tell us tomorrow. But for the first time since the funeral, I feel like maybe, just maybe, Dad was one step ahead of his brothers all along. Something tells me my uncle's 31 desperate phone calls were just the beginning of their problems. Sorry for the delay, everyone. The past week has been a total roller coaster. I'm typing this from Dad's study. No, my study now. It still feels weird to say that. So when I left off, I was about to meet Howard, Dad's old business partner, for breakfast, then head to the bank to check out whatever Dad left in that safety deposit box. I was legitimately running on like 2 hours of sleep and enough caffeine to kill a horse, but there was no way I was missing either appointment. Howard chose this little diner downtown, the kind with vinyl booths that make that weird squeaky noise when you slide in, and waitresses who call everyone hun. He was already there when I arrived, nursing what looked like his third cup of coffee, judging by the empty creamers scattered around the table. First impression, not what I expected. Howard was this short, balding guy with thick glasses and a cardigan that had seen better days. He didn't exactly scream, successful businessman, but Dad always said appearances were the best disguise. Howard didn't waste time with small talk. While I was still trying to decide between pancakes and waffles, he slid a manila folder across the table. Turns out Howard has been keeping records of every shady thing my uncles have done at the company for the past decade. Nothing illegal exactly, but definitely unethical. Times they tried to override Dad's decisions, clients they attempted to poach, even a failed attempt to get board members to vote Dad out 3 years ago when he was first diagnosed. But the real bombshell? Dad knew. He'd known for years, and he'd been documenting everything himself, building what Howard called an insurance policy. According to Howard, Dad never trusted his brothers, not since they tried to convince their father, my grandfather, to sell the company back in the 90s. Dad was the only one who wanted to keep it in the family, and Grandpa sided with him. Victor and Marcus never forgave either of them. As Howard talked, something clicked in my head. This wasn't just about inheritance or money. This was a grudge that had been festering for 30 years. We finished breakfast, went with the pancakes by the way, needed the sugar rush, and I headed straight to First National. Tanner met me there, looking surprisingly put together for a Sunday morning. Meanwhile, I probably looked like I'd been hit by a truck and dragged a few miles. The safety deposit box contained exactly 3 things: a USB drive, a sealed envelope addressed to Andrew Chen, attorney at law, and a letter addressed simply to Gregory. I opened my letter right there in the bank's private viewing room. It was dated just 2 months ago, when Dad was still lucid, but knew he didn't have much time left. The letter wasn't long, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. Gregory, if you're reading this, then Victor and Marcus have done exactly what I suspected. I'm sorry you're dealing with this while also grieving. That's not fair to you. I've known for years that my brothers would try to take what isn't theirs. They've been waiting for this opportunity since Dad chose me to run the company instead of them. The enclosed USB drive contains security footage from the house for the past 6 months. I had cameras installed when I first got sick, not because I didn't trust you, but because I didn't trust them. The envelope for Andrew contains my true will, executed and witnessed properly 6 months ago, along with video testimony of my wishes. There's also a letter documenting my concerns about potential coercion. I wasn't a perfect father. I was too hard on you sometimes, expected too much, but I always believed in you, even when I didn't show it well. The company is yours if you want it. If you don't, that's okay too. It's your choice, not theirs. Trust Andrew. He's been our family attorney for 30 years and knows exactly what to do. Dad, I didn't even realize I was crying until Tanner awkwardly handed me a tissue from his pocket. It was clean. I checked. We took everything to Tanner's place to check out the USB drive. And holy shit, Dad wasn't messing around with those security cameras. They were hidden in his bedroom, office, even the living room. Tiny things you'd never notice unless you were looking for them, and they caught everything. Victor and Marcus visiting when Dad was barely conscious. The witness they brought, who never actually saw Dad sign anything. Victor literally moving Dad's hand to sign the papers while Marcus kept lookout at the door. It was all there, in 4K resolution, with timestamps and everything. Dad had basically created the perfect trap, and my uncles had walked right into it. Tuesday morning came and I felt strangely calm. I'd spent Sunday night at Dad's house, slept in my old bedroom for the first time in years. The ceiling fan still made that clicking noise every third rotation that used to drive me crazy. Now it was almost comforting. I arrived at Andrew Chen's office 20 minutes early, bringing Tanner, Elena, and my girlfriend Olivia, who had flown in Sunday night after I finally told her everything that was happening. Olivia is not big on family drama. Her own family is like something from a sitcom, all group hugs and inside jokes. But she held my hand the whole drive over. Andrew was an older Asian man with a perfectly pressed suit and reading glasses that made him look like he stepped out of a John Grisham novel. He greeted me with this knowing look, and I immediately felt like Dad had been right about trusting him. I handed him the envelope from the safety deposit box. He nodded, unsurprised, and asked me to wait in the conference room while he reviewed the contents. Victor and Marcus arrived 10 minutes later with their wives and kids in tow, the full show of family unity. They faltered a bit when they saw me sitting there with my own entourage, especially Elena. Victor tried to make some comment about non-family members at a private reading, but Andrew shut that down immediately. Once everyone was seated, Andrew started by explaining that there appeared to be two different wills, one from 6 months ago and one supposedly executed 3 weeks before Dad's death. Victor couldn't hide his smirk, and Marcus studied his fingernails like they were suddenly the most fascinating things in the world. Then Andrew dropped the bombshell. Before proceeding with either document, I'd like to show everyone a video that Harold recorded 6 months ago when he executed his official will. The color drained from my uncles' faces so fast I thought they might pass out. Andrew set up his laptop and played the video. There was Dad, looking sick but alert, sitting in this very office. He stated the date, confirmed he was of sound mind, and then spoke directly to the camera. I, Harold Peterson, being of sound mind, declare this to be my last will and testament. All previous wills are revoked. I'm making this video to confirm that this document reflects my true wishes and to address a concern. My brothers Victor and Marcus Peterson have been pressuring me to change my will in their favor. If any document appears after this date claiming to supersede this will, especially if it appears during my final days when I'm under heavy medication, I want it thoroughly investigated for coercion or fraud. Dad went on to outline his actual wishes. The house and 60% of the company's shares would go to me. Elena would receive a generous retirement package and could stay in the guest house as long as she wanted. And Natalie would receive a scholarship fund Dad had set up to help her finish her nursing degree. Victor and Marcus would each receive 10% of the company's shares and a monetary inheritance. But then came the kicker, a special clause stating that any attempt to contest the will would result in that person's inheritance being donated to charity instead. The room went absolutely silent when the video ended. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Andrew calmly stated that given the video testimony, plus the security footage I'd provided showing the circumstances of the new will being signed, he would be proceeding with the original will only. Victor exploded. He started yelling about how this was all a setup, how Dad wasn't in his right mind 6 months ago, how I'd manipulated everything. Marcus, always the smarter one, just sat there with his head in his hands. He knew they were screwed. Andrew let Victor rant himself out, then simply said he'd be happy to present all evidence to the court if Victor wanted to contest the will, but reminded him of the consequences of doing so. In the end, they took their 10% shares and left with their tails between their legs. But not before Victor hissed at me that this isn't over and that I'd destroyed the family. Rich coming from the guy who was laughing next to my father's casket about stealing my inheritance. It's been a week since then. I've been slowly settling into Dad's house, my house now. I had to call a plumber yesterday because the upstairs toilet keeps running, and I spent way too long trying to figure out Dad's weird filing system for household documents. The company stuff is going to take longer to sort out. I've been meeting with the board members individually, getting a feel for how things run. Some were clearly in my uncle's camp and aren't thrilled about me taking over, but most seem willing to give me a chance. Elena is staying on, of course. We cleaned out the guest house together, and she's slowly moving her things in. I found her crying in Dad's closet yesterday, sorting his clothes for donation. We ended up sitting on the floor, looking through old photos she had of Dad at company picnics and holiday parties. Sides of him I rarely saw. As for Victor and Marcus, they've gone radio silent. Their wives have called Olivia, trying to smooth things over, but that's just code for trying to get information on what I'm planning to do next. And what am I planning? Honestly, I'm still figuring that out. Part of me wants to clean house completely, remove anyone who was loyal to my uncles, but that's not what Dad would have done. He was tough but fair. He understood that business is business, but family is complicated. Yesterday, I found myself sitting at Dad's desk, staring at his chair, trying to imagine what advice he'd give me now. I realized I was doing exactly what he used to do when faced with a hard decision. He'd sit quietly, thinking it through from every angle before making his move. Maybe I'm more like him than I thought, or I don't know if this is the happy ending everyone was hoping for. My uncles are still around, still shareholders, albeit minor ones. The company has issues that need fixing. The house needs a new roof, and the garage door opener is busted. But I have Dad's journal, I have his letters, I have his advice echoing in my head. And most importantly, I have the truth about what he really wanted. That's a victory worth having. Thanks for coming along on this wild ride. Your comments helped more than you know. I might check in with another update down the road if anything crazy happens, but for now I've got a company to learn and a toilet to fix.